this is Tina Perinotto from the Fifth Estate and the Green List. This is our video podcast series, TFE Learn, dedicated to our favourite topic, solutions. Hello, this is Tina Perinotto, editor of the Fifth Estate. Today I'm welcoming Andy Marlow to one of our early episodes of TFE Learn, which is where we do a video podcast, but you actually learn a lot in the meantime, visually as well. So Andy's going to take us through some really interesting projects that he's worked on, which is retrofitting houses to a passive house standard. Now, Andy is a co-director of Envirotecture, where he's been working over 10 years, and he's got a lot of experience in passive house and also in passive house design and construct. So welcome, Andy, and thanks for joining us.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Good. So, Andy, I wonder whether you can, first of all, tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into architecture and also envirotecture in particular.
Sure. So I grew up in England and came to Australia in the mid-90s as a backpacker and spent a bit of time wandering around trying to work out what I was going to do with my life. And eventually, through a confluence of events, partly inspired by spending a lot of time driving through Western Sydney, I became quite passionate about architecture and design, especially from a housing perspective. I grew up in a, sort of commuterville version of England, which had a lot of, I guess, what we would here call project homes, and they weren't particularly good. And there were impacts of those houses not being good that I didn't enjoy as a kid. And then, so driving through Western Sydney, seeing more of the same, ended up sort of educating myself as to why things could be better, why they were done the way they were. And this sort of inspired my sort of passion for better buildings, basically. And so from there, went to TAFE, went to uni, got a degree, got another degree, and then eventually became an architect. So it took a while, but it's the relationship between buildings and people and health and comfort and all of the things that enable people to be their best selves is, it turns out, the thing that really motivates me.
Yeah, it's a great area that we work in, isn't it? Me as an observer and you guys as the practitioners, I always find it really exciting. It's like, I can't think, someone once told me, actually an architect, that there's no better thing that you can do for yourself than to get yourself an architect-designed house. And I thought, oh my God, you didn't need to tell me that. It'll just make it worse. It's a great thing, to create a space for yourself. So that's great. So anyway, you've got some projects to lead us through to show us how passive house can work in a retrofit situation. So why don't you take it away and show us what you've been doing the last year?
Yeah, so I've got a few select images, all of which are not professional, of a couple of projects that we finished recently, as in sort of late 2024. And they're both retrofits. They both will be certified as Envirotecture. So Envirotecture's the passive house standard for existing buildings, for retrofitting buildings. And it's fundamentally the same, except there's a bit of leniency around air tightness. So instead of requiring an air tightness of 0.6 air changes per hour, you need an air tightness of 1 air change at 50 pascals, which is obviously 40, a fair bit more percentage-wise, but it's still pretty darn airtight. Remembering that Australian homes on average are, depending on which report you look at, but 10 to 15 air changes. So we're looking at 10 times better.
Can I ask you to explain that sort of a little bit more for people who don't understand passive house and the air change situation, what that actually means? I think it's a bit of a mystery to some people.
No worries. So the air tightness of buildings is important because it's about control over the environment that you've created inside and outside. And so it's measured using a blower door test, or using a blower door, which basically is a large fan that gets stuck in one of the openings, normally a door, and you run that fan and it senses the pressure inside the building. And so you tell the computer that controls the fan what the volume of the building is, and then the fan knows how many cubic meters of air it's pushed into the building at certain pressures. So this way you can measure how airtight the building is, because you can tell how much pressure you've got, how many cubic meters of air are needed to do that in a particular shape and size of building. So the Passivhaus standard requires buildings to be zero point 0.6 air changes per hour at 50 pascals of pressure difference. And that's about the equivalent of a 33 kilometre per hour wind on the outside of your building. And so there's a relatively recent CSIRO study that looks at new builds, and depending on states and apartments versus houses, the average is somewhere around 8 to 10 air changes per hour. And that's for new builds. So it's nothing about old buildings in Australia. And so basically a passive house's new builds are give or take 20 times less leaky than your average new build Australian home. So there's a quantum of difference here. And fundamentally, airtightness paired with ventilation is why passive house buildings work incredibly well, and are also so predictable from an energy use point of view, because it's easier to predict the performance of a thing that you've got control over than a sieve, because sieves are great.
And we know Australian houses are very leaky.
They are, which is also why there's very little correlation between what modelling suggests a building will do and what buildings do. Because when the thing leaks like a sieve, unsurprisingly, the computer cannot accurately work out what's going to happen because it's just too hard. Whereas when you give it something that's really airtight, the computational side of things is much more reliable.
Are you saying that some of our building ratings for houses that may not be accurate to how they perform?
I feel that there's a fair bit of actual real world evidence that also says the same thing these days. But yes, been known for a while for those people who paid attention.
That's very good. And what are the other attributes of passive house before we get onto your prezzo?
Fair enough. So the other key sort of aspects are, so ventilation is, I'd say, the most important in that when you create an airtight building, inherently your next thing is, well, where do I get fresh air from? And therefore the answer to that is you could open a window, but that's unreliable. And therefore we use mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. So this is a box that basically puts air into the house and takes air out of the house 24/7 in a continuous thing. And it distributes it around the building so that you basically suck out the moisture or the air from the wet areas, so bathrooms, kitchens, laundries, and you supply the new air into the living rooms and bedrooms and studies and places where people spend time. And what that does is it keeps the CO2 levels really low. So we aim for not going over 1,000 parts per million at any point in time, which happens in passive houses. But the other key thing is that it's extracting moisture. So bathrooms, like showers in particular, but also kitchens and laundries, like there's moisture in there. You want to get that out, because if you get too much moisture build up inside your house, then you're going to potentially get condensation and mold, which is obviously not conducive to health, which is fundamentally passive house is a health standard, happens to be very energy efficient, but it's really about health and comfort.
Oh, that's and they're quiet too, aren't they? Because they've got well insulated walls.
Yes,
and things.
And they're airtight. So because air, like water, finds the gaps, and therefore air is where sound gets transmitted, and therefore that's why they're such quiet, and that's why they feel calm. So I've realised, like, there's a calmness to the buildings, and it's because you only really sense what's immediately around you, and that is actually quite lovely. And I think that's why you just get this sort of real Zen feeling. And for the people who are always, there's a bunch of people who are a bit, I'm not sure I want to live in an airtight building. But once they've gone to visit one, preferably without 100 other people on a big open day, they'll all come back and talk about how it felt different. And you try to get them to put it into words, and it's really difficult. But I think it's that.
I've heard that a lot. It's about, experiencing it. There's no better sales pitch really than getting into one. So that's fantastic. Okay, so we get that passive house is great, but retrofit, I've heard, is almost impossible. Yeah, right. That's what I've heard. So you're here to appraise me of why that's not true. So perhaps you can start the presentation and show us.
Sure thing. Yeah. So this first house that we'll have a quick look at is a big house in East Lindfield, so North Shore of Sydney. So big blocks of land, big houses. It's just the nature of that part of Sydney, for those of you who aren't familiar with it. So the original house is 1920s. What you're looking at what you will be looking at
There it goes.
is the back of the house before we did much work. As you can tell, there was a deck that is, as you can see, strewn across the backyard at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
So everything apart from that lower area with all those bifold doors was original on that second floor and beyond. And the clients have been there for 15, 16 years at this point, and they've done a bunch of things to try to make the house perform better. It's a double brick house. It's like a lot of houses in that part of Sydney. So double brick, so cavity brick, so 50 mil-ish gap in between the bricks, no insulation in that. They'd insulated in the ceiling. They'd replaced a lot, but not all of their windows with double glazed windows. And at some point, about 10 years ago, they'd built this extension on the back as well. But basically, it still didn't work very well. It wasn't too bad in summer, but in winter, it's just deathly cold.
Mm.
And that ties in with everybody's experience of living in Sydney, the coldest winter I've ever spent, et cetera, et cetera.
They never admit it, though. They always say, oh, gee, it's really cold this winter. And then you say, well, hang on, it's just the same as last winter.
We at one point, marketing people asked us to define who our clientele were, and we really struggled. And then we realized that one of the threads between a huge number of them, they'd all lived overseas. And they'd all some were born there and came here, like me, I guess, but others had just been away and stayed away and come back again. But people who've experienced housing in other countries where it isn't deathly cold in winter, it turns out. So they come back expecting more, which seems fair. So these clients came to us saying, we want to, this was through our design and construct firm, and they came to us basically saying, we want to knock the house down and build a passive house because the thing we've got doesn't bloody work, and we're fed up of trying, and we've spent all this money and it's still not very good.
Okay.
We're like, okay, no worries. And you take a brief and you do all the things that architects do. And we went to the house right at the very start, and you're looking at it going, it's a big, solid house. And this just doesn't feel right. Like, it's too big to knock down. It's in good condition. Like, it looked lovely and the floorboards were nice, and there's a whole bunch of nice things about it. Anyway, so we go away and we design the new house that they want. And then we put down the new house and the old house on pieces of paper next to each other, and a good chunk of them were exactly the same in terms of a floor plan, because it's, the nature of that house on that site and the orientation and all the other factors mean that the sort of the planning of that building is pretty good. So we go back to them and basically say words to that effect. Long story short, we ended up effectively doing a deal with them where we said, we think we can fix this. And we showed them how we were going to fix it in terms of what the new house would look like, which is what we've now built. And the client's comment back was about money. And they still wanted a passive house. And we're like, yep, we can still do that. And they basically said, as long as it doesn't cost us any more, we're happy to do that. And so we did a bunch of costing exercises with the builder, because we had the builder on board from day one, because that's how our D&C firm sort of works. So we did that, and we're like, it's line ball. We've put a lot of contingency in the retrofit because we know that we need a contingency in there, but it was pretty much the same. And they thought about it. They came back and said, yep, hell, let's do it. And so at that point, we just got on with it. And so we've finished and it's done, and they're living it and it's going very well. So,
would you like to be on TFE Learn? TFE Learn is a chance to leverage your expert understanding of green design, sustainable materials, or technological innovations and turn them into discrete episodes that your audience can fit seamlessly into their busy life, whether they want to listen or watch. If you want to sponsor one of these episodes and feature as a presenter, get in touch today. Send an email to Events at the Fifth Estate to learn more.
We pulled off the back of the house. So it got to the point where it looked like that fairly early on. And so everything that you see there got retained. And then we've gone and extended and done some other bits at the front. And so let's just have a quick squeeze into that part. So what I want to show actually So some nice details. So this is part of the reason we didn't want to knock it down, is this is out the front, and this is, as you can tell, during construction. Like I said, these are not the best photos in the world, but they have these LED-like windows. They've got these beautiful curved brick walls. Like these are things that we almost never build anymore, because the craftsmanship involved in doing these things well is off the charts, and very few people want or can afford to pay for that. And so over on the other corner, they've got the same detail with this curved wall and these brick details and all of these lovely features. And so we've been able to keep all of those because we've insulated the cavity in the front part of the house. So that 50 mils of space between the bricks in Sydney is enough to provide reasonable amounts of insulation. And then most of the windows in the front of the house were already double glazed anyway. The curved ones that you can see here in the corners were not. So we retrofitted secondary glazing to those.
Curved.
So
how did you get
curved.
that? Yeah. So that sounds quite tricky to get done.
It wasn't. Well, it wasn't tricky, and you just bring the guy who does it, and he does it.
Okay.
But there's a company that do secondary glazing, and they're like, basically, it's because it's perspex, it's not glass, the secondary one. I mean, you can curve glass too, obviously, it happens, but it's expensive.
Yeah.
So they're like, what's the radius? We told them, they're like, yep, we can do that. And then they just do a very accurate site measure, bend it.
Okay.
And somewhere, one of the few photos.
Andy, I need to ask you what it's called too, and also the insulation, what you use. Yeah. What's this perspex called?
The company that do it all is called Magnetite.
Oh, yes, I've heard of them.
Yeah, they've been around for ages. Normally they just do straight windows. And so we had a choice with the curved windows. So we could either do what we've done, or we could have had new windows made that were curved. And from memory, I think this cost us maybe $1,000 a window for the curved stuff. I'd have to check, but I do remember that the new curved windows were about $5,000 a pop.
Oh, okay. Sounds like a great solution.
Well, and the thing was, the frames were in good nick, and the outer sheet of glass, which is only like 3 mil float glass, but there's nothing wrong with it. So I guess within the ethos of everything we were trying to do, it's like we're trying to save as much of the building as we can. And because they don't need to open, because as you can see in that image now, like there's other opening windows in the room. So let's just put this secondary glazing on and we're done. So some of those decisions ended up being quite simple. They didn't seem it at the time always, because you have to go through all the hoops to get to the point where it becomes simple. But yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. And so, there's a pump-in insulation in between the cavity of the walls. Which is a pump-in. So they literally, I might have I've got a photo of that. Maybe. Hang on. I might have. Oh, that's a completely different house. We'll come back to that one. You can't quite see it. This is a different detail. But this is the top of the wall. And so that's the outer skin of brick. Behind that black wrap you can see, basically, there's a point where a guy comes along with a big truck with a big bag of basically chopped up fiberglass insulation, and they literally just blow it into the cavity in between those two brick things. So at that point, you've got to make sure that the cavity is all sealed. And you can see here in the image where there are these bricks visible. And so that was where there used to be a whole bunch of brick vents. So traditionally, when they built cavity brick houses, there's vents top and bottom so that the brick cavity can be vented. So the original purpose of having the cavity was to control for moisture. And so we have to block those up so that the stuff doesn't come out. And then we control from moisture now, basically by the coatings, by the finishes on the bricks on the outside. And so in a Sydney climate, this is fine. But in, say, a Melbourne climate, this is not so fine, or it's more line ball from a risk point of view from condensation and moisture. And so big picture land, retrofit is tricky, but it's also very nuanced. So a lot of it's climate specific. So in Sydney, 50 mils of pumping insulation in the wall cavity, plus a few other things that we've done, are enough for the building to perform to Passivhaus standard. But that same thing wouldn't work in Melbourne or anywhere that's, a reasonable bit colder. So it's all about effectively local solutions climatically based solutions, really, to different problems. So we're lucky to some degree that this works here. In Melbourne projects, other colder places, you need a different plan, which is what I'll actually show you with the other project, which is in Orange, which is bloody cold and bloody hot.
Oh, okay. So because I'm interested to hear what you would use in Melbourne and colder places, of course. Yeah.
Well,
Great.
and also this is a brick building. The other one's a timber building. So,
Okay.
yeah. So what else should I show? So, so there's lots of details about how this was done that were quite sort of nice, that made things sort of come together really well. You have to deal with the thermal bridges at the corners, always at the corners of the building. That's nearly always the tricky part. So in this image, there's the ceiling insulation that comes across, but traditionally this little bit at the top of the wall isn't particularly well insulated. So you get these cold bridges at the corners. So this sheet of PIR foam that you see on the screen, that's the way to solve that particular problem.
So it sounds really finicky. You've got to find all the gaps and seal them up. So that's where most of the work comes in, I guess.
Yeah. So fundamentally, that's the tricky part, is the air tightness. And inherently, when you go around the building and work out how to make it airtight, it's not there's caveats to this, but it's not wildly difficult to then also insulate it as you go along. Because at the point you're pulling enough of the building apart to make it airtight, you can generally insulate it fairly easily at the same time. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. I mean, and look, to be fair, the builders have, these guys have been doing Passivhaus for a while. They built the very first one that we did in Sydney, or the very first one that was done in Sydney, which we also designed. So, these guys are as experienced as they get in Sydney. So they did a fantastic job. But there's no reason everyone else can't get their act together and do the same thing.
Well, that's why we've got this show on, so that people can learn and take your work away from you in the future.
Yeah, look, we've always had that dilemma. It's like, well, should we protect all the things that we know? It's like, well, we could, but the world needs a lot more buildings than we can ever possibly design. So
absolutely, totally agree.
We trust in the world will deliver for us thing. This is we're talking about the ventilation system. This is the ventilation system. So big box, air coming in from outside, and the two big pipes on the left, air going into the building through all the little pipes on the right. The two boxes you see here and here are the manifolds. So they help with acoustic deadening. So one of the key things, back to the quietness, one of the underlying criteria for the ventilation unit in a Passivhaus is that you can't hear it, because it would be uncomfortable from a human perspective. And therefore, those deadening boxes allow that to happen. And you can sort of, depending on the resolution of your screen, you can sort of see how they've labelled where each of these come from, because you obviously want to make sure that you connect all of the ones from the wet places to the right manifold box, etc. So, yeah.
How much do those systems alone cost? Because they're the ones that are imported, aren't they? Is that right? The ventilation system?
Yeah. It depends on the one and depends on the size and the quality. So there's a fairly big gulf between the cheap ones and the really good ones. This is the basically top of the line. They're about $7,000 for the box.
For the top of the line one?
Yeah.
That's very
Which will serve. Yeah. Oh, look, we think so. I mean, it's really hard to justify saving money on those things. Like, it's literally the lungs of your house. And in the scheme of building a house, whether it's $7,000 or whether you get a cheaper version, it's $5,000, like $2,000 in $1 million+ job, while obviously $2,000 is $2,000. Like, it's probably not the best place to save your money. This is a whole bunch of shots of the internal bits of the this is the new section at the back, which if I I don't have a good picture about the back. Anyway, but there's a big new space that we created, which is a living dining kitchen at the back of the house where the original deck used to be. And it's just a very nice new house, really. We've got this nice curved wall internally, which is really just because there's curves in another part of the house, and it looks lovely, and it connects up to the old part of the house. And this is the staircase, which again, another reason we didn't want to pull the thing apart. We had to half pull it apart, but generally speaking, we don't build curved staircases and curved steel balustrades and handrails anymore. So
That's just gorgeous.
they did a sensational job. So it's all of the treads are still the same. They all got taken off. So we had to replace the flooring downstairs for a bunch of reasons, partly to do with air tightness, partly to do with levels and blah, blah, blah. And so we had to lift everything because of the flooring, the floor to ceiling height changed so that all the tread heights are the same. So they took off all the treads, they stained them, they did what they had to do to put them all back at the right level. It's gorgeous.
Really is.
Yeah, it's stunning.
And the curve, it's just, I love those lovely curved shapes you get, what do they call them, P&O style houses, I think in the 30s or whatever. Not that I'm very good at that, architecture description. Beautiful.
Yeah, but it's like it's that connection to like curvy things and anything that's just got that natural biophilic kind of thing. It just feels nice. Yeah. So that, in terms of pictures, I mean, like I said, it's only finished in November, December. So that's about all we have in terms of pictures for the moment. Hang on a sec. I think that's about it for that one. Yeah. Yeah, I don't even have a good shot about the back.
There's another view of the staircase there, though, that I saw scooting past. Where was that? Yeah, sort of a side view. Oh, I thought I saw it.
Yeah, you might have. Hang on.
Yeah, further down. There it is at the bottom of that screen.
Oh, that's the one.
Oh, yeah. Very nice. Oh, gorgeous.
Yeah. So this looks to be before they painted the wall because there's a whole bunch of crap on the wall. But yeah, you can see. Yeah, it's
and
just
they're timber,
really
are
nice.
they? Andy, are they timber?
Yeah, that's all timber. Yep.
Yeah.
And we had to lift the balustrade slightly higher than it used to be because it was non-compliant, and now we had to make it a little bit more compliant. And so it's just, it's divine. They are incredibly happy.
Oh, that's incredibly good. Happy. I would be too. Excellent.
Yeah. So
what about the floor? Did you sort of pull the floor up, you said, to make it even, and then you had to insulate that as well? And the ceiling, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we took all the floors out of the ground floor of the front part of the house, and there was a few reasons for that. Partly we needed to make sure that the walls were airtight all the way to the ground. So because it's a suspended timber floor in there, your floor level's up here, but you've got that subfloor space under. You need to make sure that little wall in the subfloor is also airtight. Otherwise, because it's a masonry building, you'll get air that'll come in through the wall and come up through the wall. And air, like water, will always find a way, which is both good and bad. So
you had to seal the bottom of the floor down to the ground.
Well, we seal the wall. The whole wall was rendered internally all the way to the ground.
Yeah.
And then the new floor came in above that.
Yeah.
And then it's taped to the wall. And then flooring goes down and skirtings go on, so you don't see any of the tapes because obviously they're not very pretty. And it was insulated underneath as well at the same time.
Yeah. So, what did you insulate the floor with?
The floor's just fluffy bats. The pump-in stuff in the wall is basically chopped up fluffy bats.
Yeah.
And then we insulated on the ceiling. So because in the front part of the house, in the retrofit part, because it's a traditionally framed roof, so there's rafters, but there's purlins and under purlins, and there's just a whole bunch of timber up there. It's really, really hard to insulate at the roof level.
Oh, yeah.
So mostly we insulate just on the ceiling, which is what happens in most homes. When we build new stuff, we tend to insulate everything up with the roof in the same plane. But it's tricky in these jobs. So the insulation's on the ceiling, and again, just more fluffy bats. they'd actually, because they'd insulated the ceiling and it wasn't that old, we kept the insulation they already had and then just put more on top. So we got to reuse pretty much everything that was already up there. It wasn't enough, but it was a good start. So again, just nice from a overall carbon point of view. And then the stuff out the back, the new bit out the back was built like a new house, basically. So just timber frame and insulated and wrapped and all the things that you do on a new build as well.
Yeah. Are they downlights, by the way?
Yes.
Oh, okay, because I heard years ago when we were sort of starting off on all of this, and us, I mean by us, I mean us learning about it, is that you should avoid downlights because they create an opportunity for thermal bridging.
They would. Well, it depends where they are.
Right.
So this is the new part of the house. So it's constructed off. It's got a concrete slab. It's got slab edge insulation. It's got its new timber frame walls, and then the roof of this is actually a SIP panel, so a structurally insulated panel. So basically, it's a skin of metal with insulation in between, and then a sheet of profiled metal roofing on top.
Oh.
So, and we've used those a fair bit too, and this builder in particular quite likes them. They're incredibly fast. Like the whole roof goes on before morning tea, so it's really good from a weather tightness point of view as a builder. But what that means is all of your insulation and your air tightness is all in this one thing that sits up here.
Right.
And so what you're looking at is the gyprock ceiling. And because the roof's on an angle, which is as they should be, the ceiling is set down a bit. And because we're running all of those ducts that you saw in the other image, wherever that's gone, because all those ducts are running around, you need a gap of about 120, 130 mils between the underside of that roof and your gyprock ceiling anyway. And so all of the light fitting is sitting in that same zone. So we have these service cavities in which you can put all of this stuff so that you don't compromise air tightness and you don't compromise insulation. Okay. And we do the same in the walls. So with a new wall, like you build a timber frame and insulate it and you wrap it, and then you build a service cavity so that all of your cables and wires and power outlet boxes, like the thing that sits behind the plate that you see, all of those things can sit in this zone and don't compromise your insulation or your air tightness.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It also makes it faster to build.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question about occupant behaviour? It's something that's continually comes up in the discussion about passive house, and people who are sceptical about it, they say, it's a closed, it's a closed seal box like an esky or something, and who wants to live in that? And I go, well, hang on a minute, you've got doors and windows. So when occupants are living in a passive house, do they tend to rely on the air filtration system, or do they actually open windows and doors?
In our experience, it is varied, but what I'd say, I think my synopsis of all the clients we've got who've got these houses, and we talk to them pretty regularly, often to try and talk them into opening up for a sustainable house day, which is coming up, and you should all register and go and have a look. So they tend to open the doors and windows to enable the house to cool in summer, in evenings when that makes sense.
Yeah.
So say the last couple of days we've just had in Sydney, so like 41 degrees in the middle of the day, dropping to 22 or something by 6:30, like that massive southerly kicking in. So a lot of them will, and partly it's the nature of them as humans, like they're all to varying degrees some sort of hippie. Not all of them. They are, but they don't all look like. None of them look like. No
one looks like a hippie anymore. We don't wear sandals.
No. But they've got that connection. Like they understand those connections, and so they often open the windows at those moments when it makes sense. But what they're not seeming to do is open the windows every day. Like it's not like they wake up in the morning and open the doors and windows like they did in their old house. And so my real takeaway from this is that people open the building up when they sense or know or believe that there's a thermal advantage to doing so.
Right.
Whereas in standard Australian homes, people open the windows up when the air quality inside demands that they do. And therefore, there's this gulf of difference because the air quality inside that passive house basically never really requires you to open those windows. So you're only opening them when it suits you. And obviously, if you've got 300 of your favorite people around and you're having a big barbecue, then you tend to open the doors. But basically, you don't have to, but people do, but only when they think they want to.
Yeah. So that brings up the question of heating and cooling. So how does this one in particular, how would it perform? We expect it to perform when it was 41 degrees outside.
It would. I should have checked. I've got data loggers in there.
Because you've got an aircon as well, haven't you? That's the air filtration system you showed us, and then there's aircon, right?
Yeah. So this big grill up here, in that image is the aircon. So it's got a 7.1 kilowatt unit downstairs and a 3.5 kilowatt unit upstairs, and that's it. So it's in the that one, obviously you can see, is in the kitchen, living, dining area, and then the one upstairs is in the main bedroom.
Right.
And mostly that's what we've done as an overall strategy in a two-story house. You put an aircon unit in the big space downstairs, and you put an aircon unit in, as we describe it, the bedroom of the people who are paying for the house. So they get really good temperature control. And so, I mean, these guys have got kids, but they're all in their early 20s now. And the kids' rooms fluctuate a bit more because they don't have an aircon unit in them, but they're still pretty damn comfortable. And so the key difference yesterday, the 41-degree day being the best example, there's a lovely twist in describing a passive house like an oil tanker, which is pretty much everything it's against. But it takes a long time to turn it around. And so if you let the passive house get hot, and on a 41-degree day or on a series of 41 degrees days, eventually it'll heat up. Doesn't matter how much insulation you've got and how good your external blinds are. And therefore, the knack of them is to keep them stable. And so we've got a whole handover manual that we always refining that's all talks about basically don't let it get hot. So if you're going to go to work, then that's lovely, but make sure that you set the aircon so it kicks in at whatever your comfort temperature is so that the building never gets above whatever that number may be, 25, 26, whatever. And so when you come home, it's still at that temperature. The thing that doesn't work well in these buildings is to let it heat up. Let's say it gets to 20, 28 degrees, and then try and cool it down in a hurry, because it won't, because we've only put in these two units. They're sized to keep the building cool. They're not sized to cool it down. And the reason you could, of course, just overspec everything, which is what lots of buildings do, mainly because they're not very good. But the bigger picture issues are around refrigerant use to start with. So we're reducing the amount of refrigerants that go into every building by having less stuff, but also the whole debate around peak load. So all of the houses we've done for the last God knows how long have all got PV all over the roof. So in the middle of the day, whether you're there or not, you're making way more power than you're ever going to need. So using some of it to keep the house cool before generously giving it back. Yeah, exactly. And you give some back to the grid, which is basically charity because no one pays for it anymore.
I know. Yeah.
Incredible. But also incentivizes people to keep their houses cool when they're not home, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So but it's taking away from that peak load in the evening as well. Because when they come home, it's either already cool enough so they don't use any power, or they use very little because they're just maintaining a temperature. So,
How many square meters are we talking about up and down?
I think the whole lot's about 300 from memory.
It's about
it is a big house.
Yeah. Okay, that's amazing. That 7.1 and 3.1. That's incredible. I think just in our office here, it's 5 kilowatts, and that's not a very big space. It's like, I think, 45 square meters or something. Anyway, so so that's interesting. And did your clients here put in batteries as well?
They did. Yeah, I'm just trying to remember. They've got 2 Tesla Powerwall batteries. I've got, from memory, I think one of them was already there beforehand.
Okay.
So, these guys do. I'm just trying to. I reckon we're at more than 50% of our clients now put them in. That number's been changing. Like for a while, they weren't. But the last year or two,
Yeah.
It's really kicked off. We've just finished one up at Barara, and they also just put one in as well, because I went to visit on a day when there was no power, because it was after a big storm, and they still had power, so it was nice.
Very good. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So look, that's retrofit in a Sydney context, which is, that worked really well. Clients are incredibly happy. It's a stunning house, but it's been stripped apart and put back together, so it didn't look good. You'd be pretty disappointed. I mean, the other one, relatively swiftly, is this is out of Orange, and this is an absolutely delightful client that we have, and they own a big block of land. And there's the big house, which you can almost see in the background over there. And then there was this thing, which was a transplant house. And we've come across this a few times. So at some point, God knows when, it was a house that was built in Sydney, put on a truck, driven here, and then put back together. And these are the before shots. It's not a rustic vibe that we're going for. And basically, it was in fairly terrible condition. Didn't look good, and the clients basically they fundamentally want to prove the point that in that climate you can still fix things and make them work really well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a very valid question as to whether it was something you should fix, or whether it would be better, depending on your definitions of better, to just knock it down and start again. But they wanted to make the point, and we were very happy to obviously help them do that. And so this one has also just recently finished. It's got no geometric changes to the building at all. We added a deck on the side, but that's it. But it's the same building, same footprint. The kitchen's exactly the same, because the kitchen had been replaced not that long ago. Everything else got redone inside and out. And again, very few photos. And as you can tell, this is still during construction, because the meter box is still hanging off the side and the underside's not finished. But basically what happened here was everything just got stripped back to rebuild. So we kept the timber frame, and then we basically insulated from the timber frame outwards. We wrapped it in a whole bunch of wood fiber insulation, which is like a rigid board product that isn't used that widely, but it's quite popular in the Passivhaus world. And it's really good because it wraps across, which I don't have a great picture of actually. It goes across the outside of all of this timber work. And so all of the thermal bridging that you get through the timber work, or decreased value of the insulation through the timber, all of that is mitigated because you just got this continuous jacket of insulation all the way around the building. And yeah, it was, it's a local builder, first time he's done a passive house at all.
Oh, wow. How did he cope?
He's a young guy. He's really calm. He's just methodical would probably be my best description for Steve. He did a really nice job. The clients have known him for a while. So he came with the job effectively. So when I first met them, they're like, this is Steve, he'll be building it. Okay, that's great. And then we had lots of chats about what he knew and didn't know. But like all good thinking builders, he, admitted what he didn't know, asked lots of good questions, and, did the right thing, and he's come good.
How did he feel about the Passivhaus principle by the end of it? Do you think he'll use it again?
He's rebranded his company. So they're now called Paradigm Passive.
Are you kidding? Oh, that's a great story.
Yeah. Look, I feel it was inevitable. I mean, also they're in Orange,
makes sense, right? You're going to get a comfortable house in Orange. It's freezing in the winter. I've been there.
Bloody freezing and bloody hot in summer as well.
Oh yes,
it can be lovely in summer, but it can also be. It's like Mudgee. We've done projects in Mudgee as well, and like Mudgee can be blisteringly hot. So yeah, they're in arguably Sydney's. It's funny. People from Melbourne in particular, who I know, give us grief. It's like, it's so easy to do passive house in Sydney because we don't need huge amounts of insulation. And yet, arguably, it's the hardest climate because it can be the hardest one to persuade people that they need better.
Yeah.
Um, so I feel orange is almost the easiest play, one of the easiest places, because it's such a wide-ranging and fairly harsh place to live that you really want a beautiful house that keeps you warm. So
Mm.
yeah, so
Because you can
yeah,
imagine the heating bills in Orange in the winter. Yeah. And the summer
mm,
too. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
well,
okay.
exactly.
So, and I'd like to know a bit more about the materials. You said you used a timber. What was it? A timber fiber board?
Wood,
Wood fiber.
wood fiber
Yeah.
board is what it's called.
And then what on top of that? Was it sort of that's the insulation, and then the outside is what was that?
Then the outside, this looks like a plug for the wrap people, but anyway,
We need
and
to
then
know.
on,
I mean, we need to know the names. Unfortunately, I know it's a free plug,
yeah,
but
oh, I don't
yeah,
mind it. They're
yeah.
nice people and they make really good stuff.
Well, I
Um,
think people need to know where to go for these materials, who to ask.
yeah, oh, exactly. I don't disagree with that.
Yeah.
Um, so what you're looking at here is so that's the old roof up the top. And then this is all the timber structure. This is later. So this is the new version of the roof. So the structure is still the same. We insulated between the rafters, then we insulated across the top with the wood fiber board. Then we've used this. This is a membrane that's a sticky one. So and that's because that roof is not very steep at all. I would like it to have more fall on it for a roof, but we got what we got. So what you're looking at here is this membrane will basically keep the water out, and if water sits on it, it'll evaporate because of the heat from the roof when the sun hits the roof. And then you can see how we've got these timber battens running this way and then across. So the ones that run this way allow us to have this drainage cavity so that if, or more likely when, the roof leaks, because every building leaks at some point, the water, when the metal doesn't keep the water out, the water will come, it'll hit that Adiro wrap, and then that water will be able to escape by running down and then coming down the back of the wall. And you can see here on the wall that there's these vertical battens as well. So it's like on the inside where we create a service cavity. So we've got this space to put all of our cables and ducting. On the outside, we've got a similar thing where we basically have a layer of air that's normally only, well, a minimum of 20 mils, but it means that when water gets through the roof and the wall cladding, it's not hitting hard up against these membranes. And so it falls into this space in between, this vented space, and that means that it can dry out over time. So conceptually, I think what's different for a lot of people who, especially when you're trying to detail these buildings, is thinking of the wall and the roof cladding as a thing that keeps the sun off of the membrane, which is the thing that actually protects your building.
Mm.
Because these things are warranted for 180 days in the sun or something, but not very long in the life of a building, long enough to build a building, but they're the things that create your air tightness, that keep the water out, keep the wind out, all of that stuff. So you're looking after them. So yeah.
Are
So
there a lot of
basically,
products
sorry.
like that? Are there a lot of products like that to choose from that provide that principle, or are these guys just one of the few?
There's a couple that are kind of up there as all equally or very close to equally good. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that isn't particularly good that sort of looks the same to the ill-informed eye. So you do have options. You don't have heaps of options.
Okay. Right.
Funnily enough, the thing that's actually hard, the thing that distinguishes most of the brands between them is the quality of the tapes that you use.
Oh,
So,
gee.
because that tape is going to get, like, especially on a roof, underneath that roof sheet yesterday would have got up to 50, 60 degrees pretty easily. Wouldn't have got into the house because of the insulation, but the tape that you see there that's holding stuff together, like that's got to do that every day for 50 to 100 years.
Oh, my God. And then you had a kind of ColourBond roof on top, did you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Simple.
Yeah. Simple. Some things are simple. Some things are less simple.
Okay.
Yeah. And so look, and that's retrofit. I mean, this is different in that it's a timber building. You have to pick your strategy about how you're going to make it airtight, how you're going to insulate it. And so because we did everything on the outside. On this one, that mostly made things easier. It meant that we didn't have to butcher the inside, which was really important for the kitchen because we didn't want to throw away a whatever it was, $35,000 kitchen. So most of retrofit comes down to strategy and working out how it's going to actually get built.
There's no rules, there's no templates, is there, for retrofit, I'm sure?
We're increasingly finding that there's a series of, I don't know what you'd call them, but like families of strategies, for example. Okay. Like if you do this, you must also do this and this and this.
Right.
What we mostly find is that every one of them has a pain point. And so the knack is to work out where the pain point is and effectively decide which pain point you are most comfortable with, because you'll always have one. And so if I get rid of this pain point that I really don't like, I create a different one over here or one over here. So once you've done that, you can go, okay, well, this is the least time consuming. It's normally about time and money, to be fair.
Yeah, for sure. And that compares quite dramatically, I'm sure, to some home builders who may not consider any pain points. I don't know, especially when you read about the very below standard finished jobs that you hear about. So what about the cost of this one overall? How did that fare? Can you give us a hint?
I actually don't know. I haven't had that conversation with the client yet. I'm happy to come back and talk to you about it when I do know. It wouldn't be cheap. I know that much. There's a lot. The insulation, the wood fiber insulation isn't the cheapest form of insulation, but it solved a lot of our other problems. And so it was well worth it from that point of view. This is also actually the first, now I think about it, it's our first Passivhaus project where we've used local windows. We've always imported them before. So that we had a couple of challenges with that because they're a locally made UPVC window, which we resolved, but there's a few challenges there.
So does that mean it's glass or is it Perspex or what?
Oh no, it's still glass. It's still triple glazed. So it's orange, so it's triple glazed.
Triple glazed. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and usually they're imported. That's interesting.
Yeah. What we find broadly is that of a house of a reasonable size, even this one actually, the imported windows are cheaper than the locally manufactured ones.
Oh dear.
Yeah, it's a problem. We'd like it to be different.
Not a new story though. So no. Where are they coming from?
We almost exclusively use one particular company, and theirs come from Poland.
Gee.
Yeah. Carbon footprint's pretty good though, because of basically more efficient tech over there. Still, obviously, a long way, which isn't desirable. And so the reason that the orange job didn't have those windows was to do with timing. So at the point when we started, we didn't think the timing would line up because there's about a 6-month lead time. As it turned out, a few things happened and and we probably could have used them. But anyway, we didn't. So, yeah.
So you gave the local manufacturer got the job. Yes. Are they used to doing these kinds of windows or was this new for them?
Yeah. Oh, no, they are. Like, this is what they do.
Oh, okay.
So that isn't news. We just had a couple of challenges with air tightness because there's a couple of parts of the windows that weren't as perfectly good as they needed to be, but they got resolved. So
okay,
that's all part of the learning, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. So, okay, yeah. Very good. So that's about it.
Look, I mean, I could talk all day about these things, but as we don't have a bunch of pretty pictures yet, it's sort of where we're at. And I get this is possibly how retrofit will always be. It's an evolving feast.
Yeah.
And it is tricky, but it's also not that tricky. And it's I don't know. We've realised that it's the hardest thing left to resolve because the detailing is hard, but it's also the most important thing we've got left to sort out, and we just need to fix the things we've got. Because as a planet, we don't have enough stuff to build all the things we've built before again, so we need to find ways to fix what is there.
Yep, the most efficient is the one. Buildings are the ones we've already got. Now that's really interesting,
Yes.
and I love the way that you're, portraying the challenges as you go through. You're not saying we've got this perfect solution. It's an evolving thing, especially with, the retrofit. I think it's fantastic insight, and I really love the photos that are not professional and finished. Like that's what I want to see. I want to see what it looks like, as it's getting done, because it gives you a lot of insights. But what a great story. So thank you for this. I find it really interesting. It's getting me excited again to think about something to do with my place. But anyway, that's a
I've been
shot.
thinking about that too. So,
Yeah. Anyway, it's all much fun, and I think a lot of people will enjoy learning from this. So thank you very much for your time and your patience in taking all my questions and showing us what you've done here.
absolute pleasure. It's always fun to talk.